So this week, we've obviously had a whole lot of webinars featuring many different speakers on housing, food, a whole range of things. And today is on energy. Acknowledging the country we're on today, that sovereignty has never been ceded, that everywhere we walk in this country, in so-called Australia, we're walking on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander lands. And I think when we're talking about degrowth, it's really important that we centre this in our practice. I won't go into the depths of what degrowth is, but, here's a really kind of good explanation. It's, basically, simply, it's like really trying to end this paradigm we're in of economic growth, and that we are on a finite planet and we must look after it. So this is the session today, degrowth and energy. Both this week's been hosted by the Degrowth Network Australia. Degrowth Network Australia formed at the end of last year. We gather locally and nationally, and we really encourage people to get engaged. It's a wonderful space for people who don't know much about degrowth, and for those who have been working around degrowth issues for quite a while. It's a space to share and to learn, and we're really hoping to move forward in engaging and educating and actually putting degrowth into practice. We really encourage you to contact us, and you can on Degrowth Network at proton.me. And also the New Economy Network Australia, which has been around for a while, and it's a network of organisations and individuals that are really looking to create an ecologically healthy and socially just society, as well as transforming our economic system from the linear system we're in now. NENA hosts a whole lot of hubs, including the Degrowth Hub. I really encourage you to go to the website, the New Economy website, have a look, it's fantastic. And also definitely get in touch, NENA at neweconomy.org. So on to this session now, and I'm really sorry, we were supposed to have another facilitator, and oops, I don't know where my slides went. And I'm kind of doing this myself right now, and I am actually the first speaker, so I'm really sorry you're going to have to listen to me a little bit longer, maybe for about 10 minutes. But we also have Marisol Salinas, who'll be speaking after me, from the Latin American Solidarity Network, a proud Mapuche woman who has been doing extraordinary work for decades. I'm very excited to hear Marisol speak on degrowth and energy, particularly from the perspectives of local communities and the front lines. And Vicky Ray Elmore is from Act on Climate Collective at Friends of the Earth. And Vicky's going to look at how do we bring degrowth into the climate space. So I will just escape out of this one, oops, and throw up my presentation. So my presentation's just going to sort of ground us in this conversation. So I'm looking at the energy transition, green extractivism, and degrowth. So what is the energy transition? Most of us probably know, but just to sort of take us back to 101, it's the pathway towards a transformation of the global energy sector from this fossil fuel-based world we're living in now to a sort of so-called zero carbon by the second half of the century. And at its heart, currently, this energy transition looking at reducing energy-related carbon emissions to stop runaway climate change. And the current global energy agenda, as we know, is this sort of fossil fuel-based agenda, where a lot of it is being extracted from the global south, although Australia is definitely not that we're global north, and we are actually the largest exporter of coal in the world. And so this mode is a controlling and plundering of these resources through mining extraction. And this development model has been in place really since colonisation. And, this has included slavery, exploitation, and violence. And Australia is a very good example of that, as we know, with colonisation and genocide and, the coal industry being there right at the fore. And so in thinking about this, we have to remember colonisation and extractivism go hand in hand. And these we know, and we can see, and we're living in it right now, that these agendas have created the crisis we're in now, the climate crisis and the converging crises of biodiversity lost. We've seen human rights defenders being killed and incarcerated, and it's creating sacrifice zones that are driven by war machines, and as we're seeing this ever-creeping militarist governance of the world. So the green energy transition, which some of us call the material transition, as I said before, is this pathway to move to the zero carbon systems or to decarbonize. And within that, you have these critical, or they're called critical or strategic or transition metals. And these are metals and non-metals that are considered vital for the economic well-being of specific economies, yet supplies may be at risk and for which there is not existing or commercially viable substitutes, which can be completely debunked, by the way. But this is sort of the agenda that's been thrown at us. And in this context, these metals that are being told that are essential to decarbonize are like lithium, copper, nickel, rare earth, cobalt, and there is actually many more, but those ones are quite significant ones, particularly in the Australian context. So if we take a step back from the sort of growth economy, capitalist, green extractive, green energy transition, what is it really? And I really love this quote by a really well-known researcher, Theo Rio-Francos, who's done extraordinary research around green extractivism in the context of Latin America. And she says, it is the subordination of human rights and ecosystems to endless extraction in the name of solving climate change. So if we can kind of hold that there, I think that's a really good quote to think about what we're in now and why degrowth is going to be so important if we really want to talk about a just transition. So this green extractivism will mean intensive resource exploitation, and it's justified once again by economic growth and climate mitigation. And green growth basically is just a constant supply of raw materials for the green energy transition. So we're not shifting out of the current extractive logic we're in or capitalism. And so, you know, green mining as the greenwashing machine is associated with, you know, positive images of high-tech industries, green jobs, and so-called climate-friendly extraction. And, you know, there's this really quite vigorous and intensive greenwashing that is happening around this. So in the context of Australia, we're a mining country. We're not just a mining country domestically, but we're also quite significantly prominent internationally. We have 40% of global market share of metal mining. Some of the biggest mining companies in the world, BHP, Rio Tinto, Fortescue Metals. And this has been part of the settler colonial narrative for 150 years when colonization started here. And we know, most of us know, a lot of it is focused around coal, but really across all of the mining industry, there's really big impacts on environment, waterways, and particularly Indigenous lands. In Australia, we've got like 60,000 abandoned mines. And then, of course, we have these sacrifice zones. So every day, and as I speak, you know, cultural heritage sites in this country, and First Nation cultural heritage sites, are being destroyed. And most of you would have heard of Juukan Gorge in Western Australia and Rio Tinto and the intense destruction of this incredibly old and significant cultural site. And unfortunately, we are positioned in Australia, and the geopolitics that are playing out has been quite dominant in the transition minerals for green energy sector. And just to sort of run through, you know, here are some percentages around sort of where we are placed in terms of the minerals in our country. So currently we're ranked first for lithium, sixth for copper, fifth for nickel, third for cobalt, eighth for rare earths. And that's going to keep ramping up, particularly now that the Australian government's released its critical minerals strategy, which just is so backed by this continued growth narrative. And so it will mean a massive increase in mining of these metals, not just domestically, but also internationally. And under AidWatch last year, we did a mapping of Australia's footprint domestically and internationally of these particular minerals. And it's actually quite mind-blowing, the expansion and what it actually means. So why is this sort of, you know, discourse around green extractivism and the green growth agenda, green mining, problematic? Well, it's problematic because it's just going to keep growing material production and consumption, which is really at the core of so much of the problems in this world. switching to clean energy will actually really, clean energy in a continued growth narrative is really not going to slow down ecological breakdown and the other crises we're facing. So we're kind of caught in this fossil fuel versus renewable binary, which unfortunately is so simplistic and narrow. We are not seeing actually what the long-term impacts are going to be by this sort of green growth, green extractive system that is being pushed. And as I said, expansion of mining and mineral processing and sacrifice zones. I will just touch on this because I know Marisol will be talking, from the sort of frontline perspective and probably hopefully giving some sort of case studies around that. So I'll just sort of give a brief what that actually means. And there's a quote from Naomi Klein: these are places that to their extractors somehow don't count and therefore can be poisoned, drained, or otherwise destroyed for the supposed greater good of economic progress. Outside Aid Watch, I also work on the issue of deep sea mining and have done so for 12 years. Deep sea mining in the Pacific, if it opens up, and we're currently in these 3 weeks right now, it's a really pinnacle point for the movement. If it opens up, it will be the largest mining operation the planet has ever seen. Mining our deep seas, it's huge. It's about, the area that we're going to mine is about a third of the United States land. And this is an example of a sacrifice zone because the industry, the pro-deep sea mining industry, is pushing this. We have to mine this for the clean green transition. So that's just one example. And that not only we don't know much about the deep sea at all and the ecosystems that thrive there, Pacific peoples as a movement are saying no and calling for a ban because of their cultural ties to the Pacific Ocean. So there are some solutions, right? We've heard about efficiency, and some of you may have heard about a circular economy, but is this enough? So we're currently in this traditional linear economy where we use resources and create waste at a rate that is estimated to be 1.7 times what the Earth can support on a long-term basis. And I'm sure that's actually, that figure is probably far greater, to be honest. But we've seen that the efforts to increase resources and energy efficiency have not really led to desired reduction. This is because the gains in efficiency lead to this paradox situation known as the Jevons paradox that actually creates consumption. So, the example, money saved on leasing, renting, or sharing, or pooling a product is likely to be spent on something else, which may be more environmentally damaging. And the circular economy, which has 3 principles, is eliminate waste and pollution, circulate products and materials, and regenerate nature, is underpinned by transition to renewable energy. But currently, when you look at the circular economy through the lens of the EU and what's being pushed in North America and even here in Australia, it still is pushed by a growth narrative. And so, we can't actually have a circular economy out of growth. It just can't happen. And that's not to sideline the circular economy at all, but that's where degrowth has to come in. Circular economy it's just not possible. We're still going to be band-aiding and band-aiding the situations that we're in. So degrowth is a solution. Degrowth challenges these things that I've been talking about: capitalism, industrialization, and it does seek to achieve social, material, and ecological sustainability. And hopefully with that, equity and equality for everybody to have access. And yeah, I think an important thing, and I'm sure Marisol will talk to this, as part of our degrowth work, we really need to listen and learn from the committed land struggles that slow or stop these sort of destructive industries, because I think that's where some of the answers are. And a lot of those are happening in the global north, or more so though now there's more and more happening, a lot of that is happening in the global south and has for a long time, but we're seeing with the green transition that it's starting to come a lot more into the global north as well. And I think it's really critical that we expose the greenwashing that's going on around the energy and digital transition. Yeah, we shouldn't be basing our pathways on the expansion of mining or extractivism. And there's a quote there from Jason Hickel. So degrowth stands for decolonization of both lands and peoples and even our minds. It stands for the de-enclosure of commons, the de-commodification of public goods, and the intensification of work and life. It stands for the de-thingification of humans and nature and the de-escalation of the ecological crisis. Degrowth begins as a process of taking less. So that is definitely got to be there in this transition and around the sort of green extractive narrative. There is no green extractivism. It is always going to result in destruction, displacement, waste, regardless. And I think, sometimes people go, but we need to decarbonize as soon as possible. We have to understand, and there's a lot of research showing that if we expand rapidly into these green transition minerals, we're actually going to be increasing the rate of carbon emissions. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm not giving you answers as such. I'm just trying to lay that groundwork of what we're in terms of energy and what degrowth can help us move to. So yeah, we cannot mine our way to climate justice. So I will finish there and I will bring in Marisol. But yeah, I'll hand over to Marisol, who I've known for many years, and very honoured to have worked with Marisol, who's done extraordinary work for a very long time. So I'll hand over to you, Marisol.
Thank you so much, Nat. Yes, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to be speaking today. My name is Marisol, and as a Mapuche Indigenous woman, yeah, I will talk to you about my people's experience and the people's indigenous people in Latin America experience with extractivism, with capitalism, and all the policies of neoliberal system that we have in place. Inche Marisol Piñent, Mapuche Meu. In Chile, if we start with Chile, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit sick today. I have around 39.9 temperature at the moment, and I told Anissa that I will still join no matter if I should be in bed resting, but I think this is so important that I couldn't be in bed missing this talk. So in case I'm too slow, just letting you know it's because I'm not in my 100% at the moment. And yes, as an indigenous Mapuche woman, that my community face extractivism coming from mining companies, forestry companies, hydroelectric companies, is a terrible situation that, because when we as indigenous people, we speak about, degrowth and why we think, it's important for other communities to understand and to listen how important it is to start moving into that pathway. Because we always read or we always hear people talking about, climate degradation, but they never talk about how undemocratic is, when organizations talk about that without taking into account that the effect, the climate degradation doesn't affect everyone in the same way. And that's when poor people, grassroots movements, and indigenous people, we come, and we talk about how unequal is the exposure to pollution, that we have in comparison with other countries when we talk about the same extractive process. It depends where your country is, yeah? So how the pollution or the exposure to pollution will affect you. Because we need to look into the power relationship between countries, the race of the country, in this case, when I'm talking on behalf of my people, being indigenous people, and also the gender that play a very important role when we talk about extractivism. And in our territory, the expansion of the capitalist system And the accumulation that at the moment is under very small hands. We're talking about 2-3 families. Sometimes people talk about 5 families who are the owners or the one have the majority of the money in Chile. And the ones have shares in all these extractive companies that I already mentioned, affecting our territory. So basically, for us as indigenous people, to have these companies in our territory, one, we were never consulted about these companies moving into our territory. It just happened. And when this happened, that came with a lot of displacement. A lot of communities were displaced into the cities, in the towns where we live, or into other cities. So my people were forced to move and start finding other ways to survive. No matter if our name, Mapuche, means we are the people of the land. That's the translation. So my people cannot live without the land, because part of our traditions, part of our spirituality, we play a very important role in the society, because we are here to protect the land. The land doesn't belong to us. We never grow up with that idea, you know, as information passed to us from our ancestors. You know, it was never like this land belongs to you. It was always, you play a very important role here, and your role in this land is to protect the land, live with the land, take from the land what you need. So that's, you know, how we grow up, and the relation we always have with our territory. But we suddenly, you know, we were pushed into this dispossession of our territory by these extractive companies. And the conflict, you know, that creates when you decide to defend your territory, because that's what at the moment is happening between Mapuche indigenous people in Argentina and in Chile. We decided, you know, the third generation after being evicted and displaced, our ancestors, we decided to remain in our territory, the little part of the territory that was still, you know, part of our communities. The meaning of that has been being jailed, killed, abused by the Chilean governments, Argentinian governments, and doesn't matter who is in the government. It could be a social party, left wing, right wing. The impact of the situation for us doesn't change at all. No, doesn't matter the government, they still continue with these extractive policies and the way they see that they can do whatever they want in our territory. Because I mentioned before, it depends where you live, if there is law who protect you. In our case, we don't have laws to protect my people. That's when we decide that we will start defending our land. At the moment, we have a lot of indigenous leaders, females and males, in jail. And the Chilean government continue using the anti-terrorist law that now is called, you know, internal law of the state against indigenous people, not just us, because we have also other indigenous communities in the north of Chile. So that's the way is the relation of the conflict that we have at the moment, you know, with any government. When we decided to protect our territory, to protect the water, you know, to protect the forests, you know, to protect everyone who lives in our territory. So a lot of our leaders, young females and males, have been killed, because that's the other difference. Yeah, when we talk about protecting our territory, we know that that means, or could mean, that we are giving our life, you know, in that struggle. And this is in all Latin America and the Caribbean, you know, because we are the most insecure region for land or environmental defenders, and that's when I include indigenous peoples in this conversation. So there is no human rights protection for our indigenous or human rights defenders. There is no public policies, that protect anyone who decide to speak or denounce what is happening, or the violence that we confront every day. Because my people, at the moment, our territory has been militarized. Does mean the Chilean government decide that because we are not letting companies to come and do whatever they want in our territory. So we are dangerous people. And how you treat dangerous people, militarizing the territory, and at the same time putting us in jail. So it's a difficult situation that we have at the moment, but that has been happening for over 100 years. It's simply that it keeps changing, but not really making any difference for us or indigenous people. We have been always talking about how important is the relation that we have with our territory, how we can, together stop the multinational corporations, destructivism happening in our territories. And we're so glad that there is different movements, part of the degrowth, listening, wanting to work with us. We call it the ecocide. Yeah, when we join, or when I join meetings with my people in Latin America, we talk about ecocidio. So it's the good living that is part of the degrowth. Yeah, I think that's the translation. And again, I'm not an expert. Yeah, I'm just someone affected who came to Australia because there is ramifications when you decide to stand up against important companies. Yeah, and my role in Australia has been always to advocate for indigenous people and grassroots movements in Latin America, to denounce part of the LASNET, Latin American Solidarity Network, and also part of a small campaign at Friends of the Earth, Melbourne. It has been always to denounce, to talk about forestry, what they are doing, to talk about hydroelectric companies, what they are doing, to talk about mining companies, what they are doing, to talk about our autonomy, our self-determination, why it's important, to talk about food sovereignty. And we believe everything is connected. And I would like to say a message before I finish, and you can ask me any question if you want. Is what a daughter of an activist, said, that for me is always important because it's what happened to us every day. He said, I will say it in Spanish and after I will say it in English. La gente a veces me pregunta, ¿qué voy a hacer? Si me quedaré aquí y mantendré viva la lucha de mi madre. Estoy demasiado orgullosa de ella para dejarla morir. Conozco los peligros, todos conocemos los peligros, pero he decidido quedarme, me uniré a la lucha. So people sometimes ask me what I'm going to do, if I'm going to stay here and keep my mother's fight alive. I'm too proud of her to let her die. I know the dangers. We all know the dangers, but we have to decide to stay. We have to decide to join the fight. All right, thank you so much for listening today.
Muchas gracias, Marisol. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much for this presentation. Apologies, I only turned up now. Had to take care of my daughter and I couldn't leave her earlier. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Nat, for taking over. And thank you, Marisol, for this beautiful presentation. If things haven't gone wrong, I think Nat has probably introduced, the idea of green extractivism and And so this message of Marisol showing the impact that green extractivism has in other countries is very important. We're gonna turn on to Vicky, who's gonna maybe now link this idea of green extractivism and the fight with climate change with the need to degrow. Vicky began in the zero waste movement and then moved into the grassroots environmental space, and then is now currently working as a community organizer with Friends of the Earth on climate issues. And she's very keen on making this link between degrowing our consumption and the path towards the growth economy. So I leave the path to Vicky, and then we will have a conversation with the three of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. Let me just share my screen. So I first would like to acknowledge that I am on Wurundjeri country, and to pay my respects to elders past and present. And so I'm relatively new to the degrowth movement, so I'll be sharing a bit about what made me has realized why we need to incorporate this into our climate campaigns, and some potential ideas of how what that could look like. So a lot of why has already been talked to, but thought I'll just recap it a little bit. So we need to degrow to stay within planetary boundaries. We don't have the materials to completely replace fossil fuels with renewable energy. It supports our goals at a very low cost. It challenges green extractivism, which has been beautifully talked about already. It will allow well-being for everyone, improved quality of life and happiness. And there are fewer risks than supply-side technologies, which come with high uncertainty. We know that it is something that will work. So these are a few quotes from the latest IPCC report. Focusing on demand, it broadens the climate solution space beyond technological switches, and it includes solutions that maintain or improve well-being while reducing energy and material input levels. And it mentions sometimes radically. So even if we do manage to electrify everything, we still need to reduce demand to minimize environmental impact of everything from mining to the build out of large-scale renewables. Sustainable development is not possible without changing consumption patterns due to planetary boundaries, resource availability, and the need to provide a decent living standards for all. So it's very much embedded in climate justice, with the wealthy individuals who have contributed disproportionately to the higher levels of emissions due to their high levels of consumption. They are the ones that need to reduce their consumption and decarbonize to allow others a fair share of resources. So as I already mentioned, some insights from the latest IPCC report. So the latest one was actually the first time that's had a chapter on demand management and how we need to reduce energy demand for lower consumption of energy and materials. So it is found that with a combination of efficient technologies and behavior changes that reduce excess consumption, we can actually reduce energy consumption by 60% globally, while supplying decent living standards to the entire global population by 2050. And as this quote says here, that's without reducing employment, without reducing human well-being, and through looking at reducing greenhouse gas emissions from buildings, land-based transportation, and food, we can get that to 40 to 70% globally by 2050. So it's looking at improving public transportation, smart city planning, improving walkability of rural and urban areas, and reducing, don't have to eliminate, but reducing meat consumption. So this is without any new technology, and this has massive co-benefits for health, economy, and quality of life. So a bit more, so also quotes from the IPCC report. So it's possible to meet decent living standards for all with a 2-degree warming window. And it states that green defaults, such as automatic enrollment in green energy provision, are highly effective. Just we're starting to think about how we might implement these. And it also mentions how those with high consumption levels are the ones that need to be addressing this and reducing, so that we address inequality in the energy and emissions footprints. So it's also looking at how development targeted to basic needs and well-being for all entails less carbon intensity than GDP-focused growth. So it doesn't simply highlight the carbon reduction benefits of consuming less. It also suggests that by creating a fundamentally different economy that's predicted on needs rather than wants. So overall, it's looking at how we can go from a global high carbon consumption and GDP growth orientated economy to a low carbon energy services, well-being and equity orientated economy. So in the IPCC report, it looks at this through an avoid, shift, improve lens. So it's how we can blend new low-cost, low-emissions technologies with social change to integrate improving ways of living, shifting modalities, and avoiding certain kinds of emissions altogether. So it's found that the greatest avoid potential comes from reducing long-haul aviation and providing short-distance, low-carbon urban infrastructure. The greatest shift potential is from switching to more plant-based diets, and the greatest improved potential comes from within the building sector, and picture increasing these energy efficiency end-use technologies and passive housing. So a lot of this can look like individual behavioural change, but most of us are aware that that is insufficient for climate change mitigation, unless it is embedded in structural and cultural change. And this is also mentioned in the IPCC report. So what are some of the things that we can do for more systemic change in this regard? I've listed a couple here. We can push for the infrastructure needed for degrowth, the services needed for degrowth. We can tax absolute wealth. It's quoted in the IPCC report to say high status item consumption may be reduced by taxing absolute wealth without compromising well-being. We can ban planned obsolescence and advertising, shorter work week. We can work on making degrowth the social norm, and we can change the political culture to focus on services and well-being rather than growth and GDP. And some examples of that are a well-being index, which is being worked on in Australia at the moment, and having a future commissions officer, which is something that has been done in Wales. And then getting buy-in. So the acceptability of collective social change over a longer term towards less resource-intensive lifestyles depends on social mandate building through public participation, discussion, and debate over information provided by experts to produce recommendations that inform policy making. So this is the role that we can play in our campaigning. And this is stymied by reinforcing social, infrastructural, and cultural lock-ins. For example, reliability on road transportation. So the IPCC report, it also dispels some of the growth myths. Increased consumption does not equal increased well-being. This is an assumption, but human well-being is correlated with consumption, but only up to a certain threshold. So they've actually worked out how much energy is required to deliver a good quality of life, and that's 79 gigajoules per person per year, whilst the average energy consumption per person in Australia is 220 gigajoules. So, in fact, it has been found that decreased consumption can increase well-being. So emissions and energy use can be reduced without sacrificing quality of life. So although we do want to support access to basic needs, but if we shift this to the maintenance or improvement of services, it can not only ensure better environmental quality, but also directly enhance well-being. Another myth, addressing poverty and climate change are not mutually exclusive. So we can solve global poverty and solve the worst impacts of climate crisis at the same time by rebalancing consumption patterns. We need the global north to reduce consumption to make room for the global south to attain a better quality of life. And this can be relatively painless for the global north. So there is enough for everyone. This is another quote from the IPCC report. There's high evidence and high agreement that through equitable distribution, well-being for all can be assured at the lowest possible energy consumption levels by reducing emissions related consumption as much as possible while assuring decent living standards for everyone. So half of the energy used in the world is consumed by the richest 10% of people in developed countries. So wealthy individuals contribute disproportionately to higher emissions and have a high potential for emissions reduction while maintaining decent living standards and well-being. So this is a bit more talking about what this could look like in climate campaigning. Pushing for public transport, not EVs. So car-dependent infrastructure locks in carbon-intensive ways. So we want it to be less car-focused, and even reducing car size and the size of EV batteries would have a massive difference in how much lithium supply we need, for example. An example of a campaign that at Friends of the Earth at the moment is Sustainable Cities' Better Buses campaign in the West, where they are advocating for better bus infrastructure so that the West can be less car-focused. We can also push for energy efficiency and localised electrification. So this also reduces emissions as well as electricity bills and avoids the need for large-scale renewable plants. And another way is to talk about it and try to create cultural change. So we talk about the need for degrowth, highlight how it can actually improve well-being and avoid difficulties in the transition, and talk about anti-extractivism and the issues of green growth in our campaigns, and tell the story of how we can live differently beyond profit-driven economy and create examples around this. I'm just going to end with a few examples of past and current Friends of the Earth campaigns. In the 1970s, Friends of the Earth was working together with Environment for Full Employment to create a link between economic growth and resource consumption. And we're asking for jobs that are not reliant on growth. Friends of the Earth Brisbane was started based on degrowth. They've done a lot of focus on the circular economy and extended producer responsibility. In 2000, there was a big campaign on ecological debt, showing that the North owes the South, and an attempt to build an economic system based on equitable resources. In the 2000s, 7,000 people blocked Crown Casino for the World Economic Forum, asking for economic justice and a limit to the power of corporations. Currently, we've got the Earthworker Cooperative, which is part of Friends of the Earth, whose goal is to establish a network of worker-owned cooperatives committed to a sustainable enterprise. And the the co-op and cafe that we have, which are two ways that we're kind of trying to show different ways of living. And just a final slide on some of my sources. Yeah, and thank you. That is me.
Thank you so much, Vicky. That was a great last presentation. So lots of ideas there on how we can degrow our economies and change our lifestyles. I want to open the floor to questions, comments, reactions. As I said in the chat, you can raise your hand if you want to ask a question directly, and we'll try and I'm going to switch my view so I can see you all. Otherwise, you can ask a question in the chat. We already have a couple of questions. We have a question by Lena. She says, what is not often spoken about is the discussion is the potential to reactivate the enormous source of human energy that we have mechanized out away. Reharnessing this source ought to be a first port of call through systemic incentive, which with this in focus. Any thoughts? This is one question.
I guess sort of just the context of human energy, just a clarification on that. If Lena could give a clarification of what.
I think that's what she means.
Is human energy. So I'm trying to understand exactly what that, I mean, I facilitated the degrowth and housing session last night. And one thing we spoke about is this era we're in, capitalism, industrialization is a very short period of our life, of human life. Also, even shorter than that is that if we think about the end of World War II, where, you know, in terms of public housing, but things happen, like, I don't know if that's what you're meaning by human energy. Are you meaning like the mechanization of work? And so humans are not, I'm a little just trying to work out what they mean by human energy, I guess. Yeah. If I can have a clarification, that'd be good. What do you think it is, Marta? What do you think that question is asking?
I don't know if Lena can intervene. Are you there? I think that, I don't know if that's what he or she means. I think that it's about, you know, how we can power machines, I guess, no? Like apparently you can cycle and...
Here I am.
Yeah, there you are.
Yeah, look, I've been thinking a lot about this, just watching life as it, you know, evolves around me, and how much we have, you know, mechanized everything in our lives, you know, from driving to work to all the, you know, energy consuming machinery we have around house and home, to, you know, travel. You know, we have, you know, when you think about how people used to live very frugally in terms of energy consumption, you know, using their own human energy in cooperation with others, for example, building things. And, you know, we've sort of mechanized and given away our potential, physical potential to do a lot of things. And, you know, once you start thinking about it, you realize how all-encompassing this is.
Yeah, and we all go to the gym to waste our energy.
Yeah. No, I think the mechanization of labor is obviously and it's just continually happening. And now we have AI. Like, I'm not even going to go there, but I agree with you. I think, you know, what that collective, collaborative human labor means is actually community as well, which is very central to degrowth. And so, yeah, I think it's something to be definitely thought about. I think it fits in. It's one of those issues that fit across all the sort of thematic areas within degrowth. I mean, a lot of it all intersects. Yeah, I don't know, Vicky or Marisol, what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think my thoughts automatically went to the farming and how farming is on such a large scale at the moment and mechanized, when the more localization and small scale farming that's something that we could definitely, get more people working on and take away that mechanization. And also in terms of localization, public transport and being able to ride your bike rather than taking a car further away to work. Yeah, those are
all of that, absolutely.
Yeah. There's a huge debate actually in my research institute, because there's some people that say mechanization actually liberates time of work so that we can, spend our lives doing more democracy, caring of each other. But at the same time, there's this, because it's going that way anyway with artificial intelligence. So there's definitely this, have this friend who has a bicycle and he washes his clothes with the bicycle, like that's how he does the machine washing goes. We have a lot more questions. I'm going to read 3 and then we can maybe, they're not in the same topic, but we can maybe, respond them together. We have a question by Howard. It says, has anyone analyzed the role of militarism in the growth and carbon issues? I have heard that the military is the single biggest carbon generating sector. It is also crucial to enforce the high level of resource extraction, as we have heard from Marisol, and also the high level of consumerism in the north. Key. Then Neil asks, perhaps the circular economy is a necessary transition to a degrowth economy. And then also Hilde asks, how much green tech is okay or even needed in a degrowth world? For example, once we've eliminated SUVs, vanity use and Audis and Hammers, EVs, do we then transition our fleet of delivery vehicles to electric, or do we keep running them on diesel? Is there any room for doing both less and better, or just less in degrowth? Excellent questions.
The militarization, so there is actually research and data out there on, I think Code Pink is a really good one to go to around the carbon issues and militarization. But at the moment, under AidWatch, we are looking at militarization of aid, but also the intersection of this sort of rush for transition minerals, particularly in this region, and the geopolitics that are playing out. So yeah, I think the military is always there in the wings of extractivism. I mean, they're totally interlinked. They want these, I mean, you want to talk about tech, it's not green tech, but tech, that's militarization. So much of it comes from there, and they need these metals for that. And yeah, I mean, the heart of it is consumption, and particularly the global north. We've taken way too much. And I think when for the last decade or more within the climate movement, talk to this and go, we can't just have a narrative of fossil fuels versus, renewables and EVs, because the supply chains are going to bite you in the bum. Often the response is, that's not our fight. And that's really problematic, because it takes away, or it does not center any justice or global justice in that frame of what it means, as Marisol has spoken to, of what's happening with this expansion in the name of the green transition. Yeah,
just wanted to say that I do think it's important, to talk about shrinking the global economy, but I think the important part is for people to get conscious of what's happening, you see, because we talk about degrowth, about this is the way we can save the planet. But it's important for people to understand what other communities are facing at the moment. You enjoy having hot water, having your car, living a comfortable life because you work all your life for that, yeah? But that furniture that you have at home, probably that came from my people's land, the wood, and for my people, for that wood, that tree to be cut or, for that forestry company to have that company or that business in my people's land, and after send it here to Australia as a toilet paper or any other paper. You know, people need to understand the meaning of what we use and why it's important to reduce the use, but also, you know, the conscience that I'm using these is like drinking Coca-Cola, yeah, any soft drink of Coca-Cola. They kill people in Colombia. It's a company who is responsible for a lot of killings, you know, so people need to get that information to understand why people talk about degrowth, you know, shrinking the economy, but what is there? You know, how we can pass this terrible experience of our people, you know, so people in the first world or in these economies, you know, will understand that how important it is, not just for you, you know, how important it is for other peoples in other part of the continent. You have here, very close to Australia, the Asia Pacific countries who they suffer similar than us. The companies there, they do whatever they want. See, so it's for a lot of Australians to go to those countries to pay less money and enjoy the beauty of those countries. It's a normal thing without questioning why those people are still so poor, why they don't enjoy what you enjoy. You know what I mean? So it's all that knowledge, learning, getting conscience, and pick your fight. You know, how you are going to contribute. What will be your contribution in this degrowth process? You know, so it's I think it's important. Yeah, it's, for me to talk about my people is not about bringing pittiness. It's about talking about reality and hoping that this will help other people to make a decision and start doing something. You know what I mean? So it's because we all together can make things change. And it's slow, probably. I'm not going to be able to see it. I'm going to be gone by then, but the new generations, you know, they will be able to enjoy this new way to relate, you know, with the land, with the water, with everything that is around us, you know. So it's be more respectful and less greedy than we are at the moment. Yeah. So I think it's important, you know, a military said, you know, the money that the militaries get, not just for the weapons, also for them, you know, when we campaign against blockade IMARC, we talk about not just about the mining companies, it's all the small business who profit around mining, the one who made the clothing, the shoes, you know, it's all that big, I don't know how to call it, like a spider web, yeah? It's not just this, it's all and everyone who profit for that without taking into account that people are getting killed, land is getting poisoned, rivers are getting dry, you know, it's all that coming from this extractivism, you know? So it's, yeah, just that. We can use our money for better things, definitely.
Thank you, Marisol. Vicky, I don't know if you want to add. I want to add a question which goes in the line of what Marisol was saying. We have this question that it's says, I would love to know the impact, influences, or opportunities communities can have in the transition to degrowth. I think, and that was also been my question, because degrowth has all these proposals, you know, that are quite seem a bit far-fetched in a society like ours, you know, like we should stop eating meat, and we don't have even electric vehicles, massively degrow our consumption. How do you sell this in this society, which is so far away from Marisol's reality? You know, Chile is far away. How do we connect it? Even the mines here are far away in indigenous lands. How do we connect the reality? How do we how do we convince people and show all, all the things that Marisol is saying?
Yeah, difficult question. I mean, that's the question that I think a lot of us are asking and hoping to do. But I think talking about it is very important step. Not just talking about, electrify everything and we need to move to EVs. We need to take and make a deeper conversation whenever we're talking to anyone about it. And I think those tangible examples, like I was talking about, and starting to build a different world and show how it can be different is very important as well. Localizing communities, local urban farms, local cooperatives. It's a big conversation, and I think people just need to have a look at their communities and see where they could possibly change something or make a difference, and working together with their community.
I think for me, as someone who, and I know Marisol does as well, part of my criticism broadly of the activist movement in Australia is I don't know if we really understand what international solidarity is and what that means. And as I said in my presentation, that really key to our work around degrowth is acknowledging and learning from and celebrating the committed land struggles that exist, that have existed. Some of them have been going for decades, in the case of Marisol's people, that are stopping, even if it's temporarily, the growth of this destructive infrastructures and capitalist industries. I think that is very key. That we continue to build those relationships and listen and learn and share those stories as much as we can, and at the same time expose these industries for what they are and their greenwashing. And I think ultimately degrowth has to challenge the system we're in, the capitalism, industrialism, colonialism, patriarchy, the whole shebang. We have to do that, which sounds big, but I think we can do that from small to big. None of this is going to happen overnight. The quick fixes or quick tech fixes are just band-aid solutions. These will mean deep conversations. And, some people have been working on degrowth for 50 years. I know in our Degrowth Network, we've had a couple of our elders come and speak, and they're actually just so excited because they're finally seeing or feeling that people want to take this and put it into some form of action, whether it's in their local community or it's nationally or it's internationally. So I think continue to have these discussions and looking at the practical ways to move forward and what we can challenge is really important. And maybe for some people, it is just advocating more about how people eat. It's the food, it's around food, or it's around housing, and it's around labor, and it's around employment. I mean, I think degrowth is intersectional, and we have to have a whole of degrowth approach if we want to create a just energy future for everybody. I don't know if that's too simplistic, but, we could bury down to sort of, specifics, but I think if we center justice and solidarity and understanding, like Marisol said, it's not just at the mine site, it's all the supply chains and businesses that are also exploiting, along the way. And so currently the move to the sort of green transition is exactly the same model. So it's going to have the same problems. Maybe we will decarbonize to some degree, but we're going to open up new sacrifice zones and have a whole nother set of issues. And is it really going to move us away from biodiversity loss, from, Indigenous rights abuses and human rights abuses? I don't think so. I mean, what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing from people on the front lines is it's kind of getting worse, not better. So I think we have to really shift the narrative. I think part of that is actually talking about what is the current narrative, even within the climate movement, and how it needs to be shifted. And that's not to undermine the incredible work that has been done so far, but we definitely need to shift from the binary of fossil fuel versus renewables and, green transition. We absolutely must go beyond that.
Thank you. There's a lot going on in the chat, actually. I don't know how you guys keep with everything. Like this, Lena says on this thing too. Well, Eternity says we need to only look around and around your own backyard. Stop eating meat, Marita says, and dairy foods. Talk to your neighbors. Turn off your fridge is fun. A good place to start is Jeanette is to stop waste. Food, furniture, clothing, lighting. So at the end, consume less. No, start on your own. There's more questions. There was a question about the circular economy, whether it was a first step. He was asking where it was first step towards a transition to degrowth. And there were also other questions around money. Helen says, are any of you looking at the role of interest-bearing debt as the engine of growth imperative? And then issues about how we make money, how money is created, and how that generates growth. I don't know if you want to delve into that one. That's actually like another whole different.
It is a different area. I mean, go back to the circular economy because we are talking sort of around energy. I mean, I critiqued the circular economy because the current circular economy paradigm is a growth narrative. It's still growth narrative, but I don't think pursuing a circular economy is futile if we have a growth-driven, we have a degrowth-driven agenda around it. I think thinking about degrowth, it has to be holistic, and of course, there's going to be transitions. And I'm certainly not anti-renewables either. It's how we go about it, and the really looking at our consumption levels and the energy that we use, particularly in the global north, because it's pretty nuts, right? We know it's nuts. And whilst, I'm pretty frugal and I try to do my best, I know I'm still probably way above the average human consumption of energy, even just sitting on this call. So it's a long haul, but I think I actually think we're going to be forced into this change. I think we already are being forced into this change because of the climate and the way Mother Earth is responding to our bad practices. So some of this we will just have to take on, and some of it's going to be hard. I don't think this is an easy road. There's no easy route through what we've created in the global north. And unfortunately, the global south are having to bear the brunt of it the most, even though they haven't created it. And that's where that solidarity is so, so important. We have a responsibility to listen, to learn, because they're actually really at the front line right now, and they're finding ways to adapt and live with that. And I think that we really have to keep that at the forefront of our degrowth work. The money thing, debt, I mean, that's a whole other issue we could go into. I don't know if I can really go into that. So I can under the sort of Aid Watch hat, but I'm kind of feeling like this is more about the energy issues. So, well, I think it's really important. And I do think finance, money is really another important kind of part of the degrowth conversation. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's certainly, I mean, I wanted to ask Marisol, I don't know if you can relate a bit more. I mean, because having been here for a few years now and seeing you've probably been here also, all the indigenous, obviously there's a huge push now for renewable energy and mining indigenous lands here. I mean, how do you relate to that? Because I guess you speak from Mapuche from Chile, but you probably see the same struggles, same concerns, or maybe it's different. I don't know if you can compare. Is there some lessons that you've learned? I don't know that we could share with indigenous groups here. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud of this situation between Chile and in Australia. I don't know what are your thoughts?
Look, I work very close to some indigenous here, and I've been very lucky that I have very good friends, since I came to Australia from here, from NAM, and also from the Northern Territory. So I have good friends, and we try to work together And what that means, we have a small indigenous group where we keep ourselves, connected, and we try to see what else we can do. So we decided to have what we call it an exchange. So we call it muscle exchange, as a way for indigenous from here to go to my people's land, to live with my people and see the way we live, and all the issues that we have to deal with the Chilean government. And it happened. We were lucky that we started this exchange, and for indigenous from Australia and from other part of the world, they went into my people's land. We organized that, and I went with all of them. And it was good to see them, and to hear their opinion about my people, the way we live, and also to be present, when the police, as an indigenous person in Chile, because we wear traditional jewelry, yeah? So we dress up totally different than in normal Chilean people. So we get harassed very often by the police just because we're indigenous, and these Aborigines were with us when this situation happened, inclusive, when one of our leaders was taken when we were traveling, and the police just stopped the car and put our indigenous leader in jail for no reason. So we all went to the police station, and yeah, so one of the local indigenous from here, Christy from Queensland, very strong, and she started calling here Australia, no matter what that time difference, and she started sending information about what was happening in that moment to us. And she made it so some people here responded so quickly, and she made the information to go all around the network, that the police, Chilean police, illegally were detaining a leader, and what was happening, that they released him immediately. That for us is important, because, that showed that no matter if we were in this exchange, we were around 26 indigenous that we got together, and we live in my people's land for 2 weeks. And we went into a very important time for my people, when we make our traditional ceremonies, when we thank the land, for what we had and all that period. So these indigenous were able to be there when we were doing our ceremonies. And when they came to Australia, the idea was to do the second exchange. So bring my people and other indigenous from Latin America to Queensland, to the Northern Territory. But that's when COVID came, and we haven't been able to do it. So yeah, we do try to work together. I do understand very well what's happening here. And we often talk about how similar is the way people treat us, how similar is the racism we coming from the state and from organizations and people. Probably the only difference I will say between indigenous here struggles and ours is that we often don't have a lot of support. Here, local indigenous, they do have, organizations who are campaigning, highlighting what mining companies are doing with, nuclear, nuclear waste. You have all that unfortunately in Latin America, especially the Mapuche people, we do that job. So we do have probably a few Chilean people, but not really organizations or groups helping in that. Also, we don't have any financial assistance. Chile doesn't have a Centrelink or any, funding or money. So in Chile, you work or you die. There is nothing for unemployment or to help you in that way. So that's why we are so connected to the land, because we still live from the land completely. You see, so we are in the land, we feed ourselves from the land, and we work and respect the land. So yeah, so we have that project with some communities here. in
Yeah, thank you,
San
Marisol.
Sorry, that was a
Right.
too long answer.
No. Yes, I guess it needed to be long to explain all what you're doing. And sorry, I think look, we have a question here by Hilde. It says because there was a whole conversation going about technology and what technology is good or not. And she asked again, how much green tech is okay or even needed in a degrowth world, for example. So basically, I think it hasn't been clear how much technology do we need. I guess we cannot. There was somebody else was saying that some of the technology has been invented. It's been, through many years of hard labor to actually reduce a lot of mechanized work. So we don't want to throw all that away. And so, which is the appropriate technology in a degrowth world? Any ideas?
Why don't we open it up that we're not answering, because I think that if other people have thoughts and ideas, I think it's a big conversation. I don't think, I think I get this sort of working in extractivism for so long, I get these sort of random emails going, go and live in your cave and you're on a laptop and all this sort of crap. And that's not the point. I'm missing the point completely. It's not about not having forms of tech. It's about designing our products and tech from cradle to cradle, for one, right? So they're not obsolete, like the planned obsolescence that exists. I think that's one way to look at it. It's just, I think there was a question in there about, but we need to, or there's, data going around that we need to increase extractivism to build the renewables, to decarbonize. And look, this is industry putting out a lot of figures to kind of open the space for investors and more extractivism, but it's not actually that necessary. There's a whole lot of other options that we could look at. There's a diversity of options in the global north around degrowth, but there's piles of waste at mine sites that could be mined for minerals and metals. There will be environmental issues around that, but these are there's just so many different avenues we could go to. Everything we've already dug up and exploited and everything, what can we actually get from that now before digging up new places? That's one. Our phones, designing these from cradle to cradle so they don't die in 2 years and you have to go and get another one. And where do they go? I mean, there's not the political will because we're in a profit-driven society, there isn't that political will to design these things so they last for a long time, or they're modular. So it's like the camera goes, you go to some places, an iFixit shop, you can fix the camera, you can put it back on your phone. These things can happen. We know they can happen, but there's not the political will around that, because who's going to make the profits, And I think that comes back to the system we're in, and we have to shift that. And that's where degrowth can really open up those conversations around this. I mean, these are really big issues we're talking about. And as I said before, it's not going to be an easy path.
Thank you. Colin, you want to speak?
Yes. I think we're talking about, I think Nat was getting to the point there, but I think we're largely talking about technology in the wrong way. Technology is, how you employ technology largely depends on the political economic system in which it's being used. Renewable energy technologies are not good or bad or anything. It depends how you use them to what purpose. We can envisage a fully 100% renewable energy society that is terrible, that exploits workers and in which no wealth is shared with ordinary people, and something like the system we currently live in. So how technology is used and whether it's beneficial or not is largely dependent on what socio-economic and socio-political system it's embedded within. And so in some sense, the bigger question is not how much green tech do we need, but what sort of political and economic system it's used within. That's the bigger question. And again, we could we can envisage a society that uses, to go back to a bigger question that's been raging in the chat about human energy. Well, we can envisage, because we know for thousands of years they existed, human societies in which human energy was the primary energy source, which were extremely unjust, unfair, and exploitative. So we know having more human energy in the system doesn't necessarily make it any better. It's, again, we can envisage a future society in which there's much more human energy in the system, which will be slavery. You know, slavery is the classic example of a highly exploitative system based on human energy. It's not about the technology, it's about the system, the political economic system that uses the technology. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody wants to add anything? Anissa?
I'll jump in. I love replying to Colin. I completely agree. And to me, that's why a lot of it comes back to localization. And so at the moment, I feel like so much of this exploitation and degradation and, you know, slavery, there's still the slavery. And, you know, a lot of the things that we can buy in the supermarkets are still, you know, slavery is still happening, as well as the destruction and mining and all of that. I feel like a lot of that happens because we go to a supermarket or to Bunnings or whatever shop, and we don't know where the things have come from. We just buy them. And that's kind of our way of interacting with the world. And I feel like, you know, humans, we're pretty good, I think, if we are given the opportunities. And so if things are localized, and therefore we'd be able to see the damage of the trees getting cut down, or, you know, a lithium mine was dug in the Mary Creek, then I think a lot of the, you know, which is a creek down here in Melbourne that I love, by the way, I think a lot of people would question a lot more these, you know, electric cars and all of these things, because they would see the damaging impacts right in front of them. And so to me, it's about, yeah, maybe we wouldn't localize everything, but trying to localize as much as we can and take the power back in our communities to kind of help each other meet our needs in much more sustainable ways, so we're less reliant on things like supermarkets and Bunnings.
Yeah. So Anissa is pointing to localized action, no? Taking our communities. And Alex here is saying, it's talking about theory of change. How do we actually do this, no? And so if it says, if no revolution is coming, then we need representation in our current system. So how do we do that? Through a new political party, or at least policies that push for these things? So I guess there's different ways in which this change can happen. I don't know if Vicky, you want to talk a bit about these different ways we can change?
Yeah, well, I definitely think we need to open up the conversation on the political level. I'm not sure if there's even much talk of degrowth. As far as I can tell, all the parties are still very pro jobs and growth. Message just keeps on getting out there. So yeah, we need to challenge that. There is the well-being index, which we're trying, which I can't remember the name of who's pushing it, but that is one way we can try and get something in, is having a well-being index within government, as well as a futures commissioner, which they did in Wales, which meant that any new project coming on, the future commissioner had a say on, and how that would affect future generations. Because I feel like the political system is only thinks about the next couple of years and getting back in. They're not really thinking about the future. And that was one way in Wales that they were able to stop a lot of unnecessary projects, such as road projects, and rather doing public transportation projects instead. So that's an example of something that we can get in the political system that would hopefully, change the narrative a bit.
Thank you. Rock, you want to say something?
Oh yeah, thanks. I just on the idea of political parties or the way forward. I mean, there's plenty of people's energy going into political parties, but they're constrained by our existing culture and stuff. What I think, I guess I'd push for, I'm just going to lower my hand so I don't forget. What I'd push for is what we need is social movements. And I'm getting from this week, what we need is a ecosystem of mutually enforcing grassroots activity that shifts the culture, that builds sort of pressure on the system, that's potentially, a transition, underneath and within the system. And, if we get a revolution, because all the stuff that people have presented here, it sounds like at the start, sounds sort of like a global revolution is what we, anyway, I won't rabbit too much. It's too much. Anyway, very stimulating, but I think you get the gist. I might just, hang on, there was something. Yeah, I think that's the gist, that we need grassroots activity, and then the political system will respond, and we'll make a new world, and we'll change the culture, and we'll change stuff.
Just to respond to that, I agree. I think that movements within movements are so crucial, and I'm not against the Greens or anything, but there's a lot of the movement building here is so determined by a 3-year election cycle of a system that is driven by growth, regardless of whether people in the Greens pushing for degrowth or not. It's quite restricted, and I think we need to build those movements so people like the Greens and maybe even Labour left or something can push on the inside within that political system that we're stuck in. Because I have spoken to some people in the Greens about particularly the energy transition, and as I said in my presentation, when talking about this with the climate movement, although I think it's shifting, a lot of it was like, oh, that's not our fight. And I'm like, how is this? Because they've just got this narrow binary of fossil fuels versus renewables. And I understand with the Greens, you're in a political party, you've got to compromise because that's the way that system exists. So, the Greens have proactively said, stop fossil fuels and let's go and invest in lithium, right? So it's still a growth narrative. It's still an extractive narrative. And I'm sure there are people within the Greens who would like it not to be that, but that's just the reality currently now. I think, in terms of political allies, the Greens and socialists and are definitely our allies to help maybe try and push in those spaces. But I don't rely on political elections or political parties in my work. I work towards building movements and solidarity as much as possible. I think when you look back in history, that's where change has happened. The political change may have happened, but that's because of those movements. So I hope with degrowth, we can always keep that centered as well as justice, but that this is grassroots from the bottom up as much as possible.
I'm going to jump in. I'm going to leave my facilitator hat quickly. I was just having a conversation last night with some colleagues around this, and they were pointing how Evo Morales, Lula, all these presidents of Latin American countries that had very radical views about what they wanted to do with the country. Once they got to power, the state is so in connivation with extractivism, but at the end, it just changes all what they wanted to do. It's just very difficult to transform what we were discussing from the state, because the state, it just gets eaten by all the capitalist ideas. And at the end, Evo Morales, Lula is reproducing exactly the same things that previous presidents were doing. Maybe they're redistributing more the wealth that they're gaining, but extractivism, for example, is going up massively. Indigenous groups are being extremely persecuted. So my point is, before I was more on, we need to do more top work and down, work from below and work from the top and converge. Now I'm more slowly, I'm changing my view and think it's more bottom up work, and then eventually change the state, not even conquer it. So I'm with Nat and several people here.
I can give you an example, and it's a very campaign specific example, but deep sea mining is this issue where at Pinnacle they may give out the first exploitation licenses. And when myself and a couple of people started this issue, we were the only ones, and this was like 2011, 2012. And then, of course, as it became more sexy, you now have Greenpeace International has it as its main campaign. I'm not saying no to that. They have a massive reach. We don't. But what I spoke to in the sort of coalition was we have to have inside, outside, and outside strategies. But one doesn't, that the grassroots, because I always said deep sea mining has to be one. It's only going to be one in the Pacific. So going to be one at the International Seabed Authority, all these high institution forum meetings and stuff. But it is really important that we have allies in those spaces. We need the information, they need the information. So I think we do need to, when we think of movements, that they are grassroots driven, but they may have different layers as well in terms of where people are placed and where they're working and where their skill sets are. As long as it doesn't undermine the grassroots, that's my kind of key thing around it, because often it does. But we have successfully got a pretty respectful space in that movement where Pacific people have a very, very strong voice, and so they should. And it took a while. It took a lot of argy-bargy to get it to that, and that's kind of the role that some of us have taken. So it's not on the Pacific peoples. It's not on Indigenous peoples to have to fight for that. It's also a space we can take on with their permission. But yeah, I think that when we think of movements and grassroots movements, that doesn't mean people aren't working at a lobbying level or international fora, as long as they are connected in that grassroots way, and as long as they're not undermining the key calls that are being called from the ground.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I do agree with Nat. Is for example, we have the Chilean government, who is a progressive government, for a lot of people, and they did what the right-wing party who was in power before didn't do, that it was approved the TPP 11 agreement, that is the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement. And that will bring a lot of disaster to not just my people in Chile. And this is an agreement where Australia is one of the countries who was pushing very strong for Chile to agree to be part of this agreement, because Australia, is one of the countries where Rio Tinto and some forestries are the one, in our territory. So it's sad, you see, but that's what political parties do. When the president of Chile, Boric, before he moved into power, he promised to our people that he will change the policies that we already had by them from the previous president. Gabriel Boric, as a candidate, he made so many promises and he broke each of them. And that includes this Trans-Pacific Agreement. So that's what parties do. That's what, they forget easily.
Thanks so much, Marisol. Yes, we need those. So we need to ignore our governments, and we need to act from below. There's been so many good messages around this topic and around what we can do locally and help each other in this movement towards degrowth, towards localism, towards caring about each other. I'm conscious about the time, so I think we're gonna stop here the official conversation around this degrowth and energy topic, and I thank our speakers. Thank you very much, Nat, Marisol, and Vicky. Yeah, big round of applause from everyone. Thank you very much, all the participants in the chat. It's been amazing. We should all be able to speak together, because it's been really good, amazing conversations and tips in the chat. And if we're going to stop the record here, but if you want to carry on,